The recent discussion about disclosure requirements for bloggers and news sites and so on led us to think that it would be good to have a quick session here on 8 legal issues facing community news producers. And it was interesting that Jonathan's example of having his twittering thrown out of court was kind of in the same vein here. And so I want to bring up Ariel Fox, my colleague at the Center on Communication Leadership and Policy, who is a recent graduate of the Harvard Law School and will be starting work next year at Foley and Lardner in DC as an intellectual property litigation associate, and she's going to introduce our panel.
Hi everyone. So today we have Michael S. Overing. He is a professor who developed and teaches an internet law class here at USC. Oh, sorry. He's a professor who develops and teaches an internet law class here at USC. He also runs his own law firm, does litigation, business matters, all sorts of things. And importantly for us, he writes and speaks a lot about legal issues facing the internet community, particularly online publishers and writers. So we're very excited to have him here today to present to us.
I know that you folks are going to be missing your break, but hopefully we'll get through this pretty quickly, and maybe David will give you a little extra time. I know that there are a lot of you that are looking at the legal issues and trying to kind of come to grips with what I can and cannot do. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through a series of slides here, and we'll go through this fairly quickly. If you've got questions for me along the way, feel free to ask. I'm more than happy to talk about them. I'm happy to talk about them in depth, and I'll even hang out later if there's specific questions that you'd like to ask me. But one of the things that really comes to mind is what happens with control. And what I've got up here on this first slide is who controls the internet. Well, in 1996, when Al Gore invented it, we know that the government issued a white paper that said, hands off. We're not going to put a whole lot of control on the internet. Let's see what happens. Let's see how it develops. And we've been operating on that model for quite a while. We haven't taxed transactions, although you do know that you pay transactional tax every time that you buy from JCPenney or whomever, but those are voluntarily collected and remitted as opposed to somebody actually saying you have to do this. Well, 2008 rolls around and you've got these problems with Comcast, and with Comcast regulating or putting restrictions on the way that BitTorrent will operate within its system. And at that time, a complaint gets filed with the FCC, and it eventually gets determined that, well, if you're going to reduce the speed of traffic, and in most instances with BitTorrent, block it, how do you have the authority to do that? Well, the FCC says we have the authority because it's ancillary to our cable regulation, which cable regulation was ancillary to broadcast. Therefore, it makes sense that the FCC has the ability to do this. Okay, all well and good, except that that's being challenged now in court in DC, and we really don't know what the ultimate outcome is going to be with that. And the second thing is, I don't know what lessons it provides to us, except that maybe at some point in time, we're not going to have net neutrality, we're going to have tiered internet. Day is probably coming. You've got President Obama's team who is saying, hey, we've got authority ultimately over the internet, and we can simply shut it down if that's what we want to do. I suppose in an emergency situation, that's always been the case. You can certainly use your governmental authority, and you can have an executive order, and you can take over somebody's private, personal property. I suspect there might be a hue and cry over that, but theoretically it's possible. The FTC, and I heard you talking about that a little bit earlier, and whether or not these rules for bloggers and how that's all going to play out. I find this very interesting because the FTC, as you probably know, is starting to have some hearings about this and about the extent of whether or not they can actually control what happens. Well, the FTC's entire purpose was to stop false advertising. Okay, I guess maybe that means that an endorsement and a review that's paid might get over the hurdle of being a false endorsement and somehow or another fraudulent. On the other hand, it sure seems to me that that's a free speech violation. I mean, I think that if I'm told about what I can and can't say, I think that violates my right to free speech. And I would dearly love to have somebody take issue with this and take it up and let's find out. But I think we're probably a year away from that. In addition, the FTC is looking at all kinds of things about taxes, copyrights, and revenue streams, and they're trying to figure it all out. But I don't see the FTC as having particular expertise in making any of this happen. And finally, then up here, I've got up here private parties. And I think that the biggest area that we have seen things happen is in that realm where you've got private parties who sue each other for trademark infringement, right of publicity violations, copyright infringement, and the like. And Ariel will talk about some of these issues in a couple slides. So the first thing I want to talk about is criminal, because criminal stuff is pretty easy. You link off of your website to child pornography, you're going to get busted. It's that easy. It's black and white. The same is true, perhaps to a lesser extent, with gambling. But you know that any place in the United States, you can't link to a gambling site, whether it's offshore or onshore, doesn't matter. But some of these things start to get a little bit dicey as we make this transition between the print world and the online world. And the case that I have up here is the Universal City Studios case versus Corley, which was the case having to do with DCSS, which was the little 26-line program that undid the content scrambling system on a DVD and allowed you to copy it. Now, under the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, there is a provision that says that if you do this with a hypertext link, that is, if you link to a particular location where it's got the ability to disencrypt, then you're violating the DMCA. You're violating our Copyright Act. You could publish that same link with a www.whatever in print media, and you will not be prosecuted for it. So now the question is, why do we have one set of rules that affects us in the print world and another set of rules that affects us in the online world? And what happens if we're the LA Times or the LA Daily News and we've got both publications and we are going to take the same content and we're going to repurpose it online after we've run it in print? Well, the answer is that we're going to come up with a series of different results depending upon where it is and where it's published. And I think that this is a pitfall for online publications. I think this is one of those places where you've got to know the rules going in, and you've got to be aware of the fact that sometimes a hypertext link, although it's cool to do, is probably not the best thing for you to do. Cyberbullying and stalking. These are interesting issues because they vary state to state. So if you are going to have user-generated content on your site, and you're going to have people who actually post things, and they start posting, flaming little messages about a prior poster, eventually, at some point, if they're able to identify who that poster was, theoretically, it becomes stalking, or it becomes cyberbullying. Well, we know from the MySpace case from a year ago that most states do not have good cyberbullying laws. And if you were in Missouri, certainly in 2007, there wouldn't have been much risk of prosecution. Fast forward to 2009, and that's no longer the case. But even in California, where the case was ultimately brought and taken over to trial, what happened there was that this woman who did and you know the story, the 13-year-old has a boyfriend, an alleged boyfriend, and it's really the neighbor mother who has created this fictitious person and sent the love notes and eventually says, why don't you just go kill yourself? Eventually, when the case comes to California for prosecution, the federal prosecutors decide to take it on the grounds that the mother violated MySpace's terms and conditions. I don't find a violation of terms and conditions to be a particularly compelling reason to go after somebody criminally. And it was a series of misdemeanor violations for every time that she impersonated or created this fictitious person. Well, if you prosecuted everybody who pretends to be someone else on the internet, that's all of us, isn't it? I know it's certainly my 12-year-old at home because I can't tell you how many times he's clicked through saying that he was over the age of 13, which you would have to be in order to enter a particular website. Well, do I want him prosecuted for lacking permission? Absolutely not. It's not a good instrument for that. But what I do have up here on this is that if you have these terms and conditions set up, at least it does give a prosecutor an opportunity to use them as a tool for prosecution. So if you've got a user who's coming online, who's actually taking advantage, who's using bullying techniques of your other users, having your terms and conditions be very explicit, having them be clicked through so that you know that the user who is there is following the rules or at least aware of them, probably a really good idea. And those terms and conditions should have some teeth to them. Next big topic I want to talk about is the right of publicity. The right of publicity is your right to control your name, image, voice, and likeness. And the right of publicity is also one of these things that varies from state to state. And one of the things about California is that it's, in particular, it has very strong right of publicity rules in order to protect the celebrity base that we have operating here. So what does it mean? Well, it means that I cannot use somebody else's name, image, voice, or likeness in order to advertise my products. That's what it's supposed to mean. But if you want to test this from the standpoint of being a good First Amendment advocate, you're going to have to ask the question about whether or not it should be left up, and let's see whether or not they actually sue, and whether or not our First Amendment will protect you. Well, the answer to the question on this one, again, is, as with anything in law, it's less than clear. But as long as it is truly newsworthy, it ought to be permitted, and it ought to be First Amendment protected. But a problem arises. How long is something newsworthy? How long can it sit on the shelf before it becomes old news? Let me give you an example. President Reagan, who had 2 terms in office in the presidency as well as his terms as governor of this state, gave his name and likeness and the right to control it over to the archives who run now the Reagan Museum in Simi Valley. I will tell you that they will allow anybody to get from the National Archives a photograph of Ronald Reagan. What can you do with it? Well, you can personally frame it and put it on the wall in your bedroom. But if you put it in a frame and try and sell that frame, I guarantee you, you will get a cease and desist letter. And the argument will be that, yes, that is a National Archive photograph. They will say, you can have it, but what you can't do is make money off of the image, because that's something that we, as the Ronald Reagan Museum, are the only ones who are allowed to do that. So now let's say that you've got a story that you want to put online and you would like to illustrate it with a photograph of Ronald Reagan. Is that something that you can do? Well, the answer to that is, again, it depends on where you got the photograph. If it came from the National Archives, just that alone doesn't make it First Amendment protected. If it's being used as part of a news story, perhaps. But it's going to have to be a pretty good news story because, as near as I can tell, Ronald Reagan remains dead, and so I don't think he's making news. Similarly, if you've got a governor who's out of office, 20 years later, can you use the same photograph, put him back up online, or put him in a publication and use that photograph to illustrate a new publication or a news story? I think that the answer to that question is equally no. There needs to be a contemporary photograph that accompanies that particular story. I think that this is absurd, but I think that's also the nature of what we've got when it comes to the law in California. Now again, since it varies from state to state, it's really difficult to figure out where these newsworthy events are going to trump somebody's private rights in their celebrity. And the biggest area where we know that this is going to be prosecuted and where you're going to lose on First Amendment grounds is when it is used as a true false endorsement. So if I have a photograph and I upload it onto your website, and it just happens to be a picture of my neighbor, and my neighbor happens to be holding a print copy of your newspaper, and I write under the caption, "See, even Jimmy loves your publication." That's a false endorsement, and that's something that probably needs to be taken down in response to the cease and desist letter. The other case I've got up here is Comedy 3 versus Saderup, where there's no First Amendment protection if a depiction is literal. So we think about court reporters and the sketch artists, and if somebody sketches something and it's too close to the actual item, if it's too close to your image, if it really looks like you, there's no First Amendment protection for that, which is kind of a head scratcher, because if my 12-year-old son draws a picture of you, I can guarantee you it's not going to be as good as an artist's sketch. But he's got more First Amendment protection in California than the artist would, especially if it's being used by you to illustrate something. So I'm going to pause here. I'm going to let Ariel come forward and talk about trademarks, and then I'll be back again in a second.
So another thing that you need to think about on your websites are trademarks. And trademark is symbol, combination of letters, words, colors, anything that's used to identify your product or someone's product from a competitor's product. Now, you can infringe on trademarks if you're using someone else's trademark in a way that confuses consumers so that they think that you're sponsored by, affiliated with, or actually, putting out the product of your competitor. So, for example, if you have a local sports news site and you put up a lot of, ESPN logos or just the word ESPN around that site, they might think that you're affiliated with ESPN, and that would not be okay. In the internet context, one issue is meta tags. So you have the same local sports news site. You decide that when people type in ESPN into Google, you want your news site to come up too. That is not okay because you're profiting from consumers being initially confused, going to your website thinking it's connected with ESPN. And even if they realize soon after that you're not ESPN, you still got them there in the first place. That's not okay. If, for example, it's a more generic term like Playboy or Playmate, courts have held that it's probably okay to have that as a keyword in ad searches because we don't actually know what the person is searching for. We don't know if they're searching for the trademarked item. Now, obviously, if you're a sports news site, you might sometimes want to write about things happening at ESPN, some scandal with a newscaster, companies being bought. You're allowed to use their trademark to talk about them. You need to be able to use a company's trademark so that you can describe them. In New Kids on the Block, there was a survey published in a magazine or a newspaper, and the New Kids sued because they said that they were, it seemed like they were sponsoring the survey. Well, there was no other way to have the survey about members of New Kids on the Block without actually mentioning the band's name. In California, that was held to be okay. The same in this Playboy Entertainment case. A Playmate of the Year from 1981 needed to say Playmate of the Year to identify herself. There was no other way to put that out there. You can obviously also mention other people's trademarks if it's criticism, so long as you're not secretly pretending to be that website. No one going to ballysucks.com will think that Bally is actually sponsoring the site. A related issue is copyrighted material. So you are all aware, copyright protects only the expression, series of words, not the underlying ideas. That's how we can have so many news stories, about one same general topic. For material to be copyrighted, it needs to be fixed, but even loading something into computer's RAM memory for a very short amount of time constitutes fixation in this country. Now, if you are the owner of copyrighted material, you have the right to make copies of it, you have the right to prepare derivative works, distribute those copies, display your work publicly. And if you're displaying someone else's copyrighted material, you're liable as an infringer. Now, any right that the author does not give, they retain. So, for example, in this New York Times case, the author gave the New York Times the story, and the New York Times had the right to publish that story in the newspaper. Later on down the road, computers were beginning, and the New York Times wanted to put a database of all of their articles together. Well, at the time that they'd made the contract between the author and the New York Times, there was no provision about also, making internet copies or a searchable database of the articles, and the author had not given up those rights. So now, the New York Times gets those rights when you give them a story, but look at what sort of arrangements and deals that you have with your authors and what rights they're giving you and what rights that they're going to retain. We've been talking a lot about user-generated content today. And even if you're not the person who writes or puts up the copyright infringing material, if you host it on your site, you could be held indirectly liable. Two ways of this are contributory liability and vicarious liability. Generally, what courts are looking for here is that you have knowledge that the material is a copyright violation and that you're materially contributing to it being up there. You're providing it to people, encouraging people to look at the copyrighted material or copyright infringing material. Also, if you have the right to supervise and take down material, but you're choosing not to exercise that right, perhaps because you're getting more page views because it's some salacious thing, It's another way to be held liable. Now, just like with trademark, when you're allowed to, make use of other people's trademarks for certain purposes, with copyright, you have fair use. This is what allows, someone to cite another person's story, make some quotes from it, link to it. Fair use is generally a very, case-by-case inquiry, but we look at the purpose and the character of the use, whether you're, making this for a nonprofit, educational use, commercial use, the nature of the copyrighted work, if it's something that's very, factual, or if it's something extremely imaginative. The amount taken, both qualitatively and quantitatively, so if you take a little bit, but it's really the heart of the matter that you've taken, that could be a problem. And then how you're taking the work and using it, in your own work, is affecting the value of the original work. So the Daily Beast has, its paragraph summaries. In a fair use inquiry, we would ask if the fair use, or if the paragraph that the Daily Beast puts forth with news stories is ruining the market of the original work because no one's clicking through to that story, or if it's actually helping the market for the original work because they're getting new readers and people are linking on that. The factors are all interactive. The judge will look at all of those in debating this, and even though it's better to be using something for an educational or nonprofit use, there's definitely not a blanket exception that you can violate people's copyrights or make great fair use of them if you're, not a commercial enterprise. Commercial use is more likely to make permission, or more likely to require permission, however, and you're also more likely to want to seek permission if you're using something that's extremely imaginative or if it's unpublished. Generally, always using less is safer than taking more of someone else's work. On that note, linking, usually held to be okay, but framing someone else's website or article so that when they click, they don't actually really go to that website, but they see it within your own, that's less okay. Aggregation and technology in particular have led to a lot of, thumbnails when you have a search. There have been lawsuits over this. Kelly versus Rivasoft was one, and the thumbnails were held to be okay, even though it was reproducing the entire image on the original site, because it was in no way affecting the market for the original. People still needed to click on the thumbnail to see anything of value. Thank you. Back to Michael.
One thing that I would add to this comment here is that times change. And what happened in 2003 with Kelly versus Arivasoft, they're at ditto.com now. And obviously they changed the name, they try and create a new image, but here's the deal. When this finally got up to the Court of Appeal in 2003, nobody knew that there could ever be a market for a thumb. Well, how many thumbs are now sold as apps for your phone? And suddenly there is a market. And that market is huge. I mean, it's $1 million industry. And if this case came up in 2009, would it come out differently? I think it would have to. Now, yeah, there's some protections that could occur, but such as watermarking on the image and what have you. But I think that the thing to acknowledge is that things change. And the more that they change, the more difficulty that we have with the legal structures trying to keep pace. And if you're on the cutting edge, and most of you are, because of the nature of what you're doing, you just need to be cautious. Next up on this is publisher liability and tort law. And you're all familiar, you all went to journalism school and you learned about defamation. I like to think about defamation as a false statement of fact, because a false statement of fact says it all. It appears to be something that's true, and it's really not true. And in the old days, you would ask simply the question, is the person who put that up a publisher or are they a distributor? You know that you wouldn't sue the newsboy, but you would sue the person who was in charge of editorial control. Well, it raises all kinds of special issues with user-generated content, because you, as a website, are more like an editor than a distributor. But wait a minute, if it's user-generated, does that make me a distributor instead of an editor? Because all I'm doing is distributing what somebody else wrote. Well, the old law would make this distinction between the traditional editors versus distributors. You hold the editor strictly liable, and you use the new or should have known liability for the distribution. I'm going to skip ahead here, and I can tell you basically what would happen is with these cases is that they would come down based upon the amount of editorial control that you had. But fundamentally, everybody's looking at this and saying, well, isn't that a mistake? I mean, shouldn't we encourage, on a website, shouldn't we encourage editorial control? If you know that something or have reason to suspect that something isn't quite right, wouldn't we be better off telling you it's okay to police your website rather than to let something occur unfettered and unpoliced? And so the result of that was the Communications Decency Act. And many of you know that a big chunk of the CDA was struck down in the Reno case, but there are provisions of it that still remain. So no provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. Big words. What does that mean? It means that if you did not originate the content, it was not your writing, a user created it, you picked it up from another website and repeated it, chances are you're going to fall within the protections of the CDA Section 230. I would advise all of you to read that. I would advise all of you to get a good policy statement implementing it, because it is the one thing out there that is going to protect you. And let me give you a couple of examples of this. Zarin versus America Online was after the Oklahoma bombing, and there was an anonymous posting on America Online selling off-color t-shirts. Zarin's phone number was listed as the place where you could buy them, and he got a lot of phone calls. He got a lot of hate calls. People found him. They shunned him. He was in fear for his life. And he said, you know what? America Online, you're the one that's responsible for this. You should take that down. And America Online says, well, wait a minute. We don't have any responsibility. Communications Decency Act 230. And the court comes back and says, yeah, that's right. There's no liability of America Online. They don't need to do anything about it. Blumenthal versus Drudge. Drudge report includes a claim that Sidney Blumenthal had a history of beating his wife. Since the Drudge report is distributed exclusively at the time on America Online, you end up with Blumenthal suing Drudge and AOL. AOL takes the position, Section 230, and the court comes back and says, that's right. All publishers and distributors are immunized from such suits. Question exists, though. What about print media versus websites? If a newspaper prints it and then posts the same story online, you still get the same protection. And the answer to that question is that it still hasn't been fully decided. We think that the correct answer is that if the CDA is to mean anything, if it's online, it should carry over into the real world as well. Interesting case in 2006, Barrett versus Rosenthal. The appellate court held that Section 230 cannot abrogate the common law principles that one who republishes defamatory matter originated by a third person is subject to liability if the publisher knows or has reason to know that it's defamatory. In other words, if you knew that this was harmful and you ran with the story anyway, you should still be suffering the consequences as an editor or as a publisher. But and that's what the Court of Appeal held. But the California Supreme Court came back and said, no, by its term, Section 230 exempts internet intermediaries from defamation liability for republication as well. And this, again, should give you some comfort over the fact that user-generated content is not going to put you in a place where you're held to answer for it. The motive behind the Communications Decency Act provision under 230 was defamation, but it's now been extended, particularly in California with Barrett, to any of the traditional speaker-based torts. So if it's something that is written, chances are you're going to fall within it, but you have to have a clear provision in here. And you have to have the ability to say that you're going to police, identify what's going to happen and how that's going to happen. Now, I've got this slide up here, which is a quick comparison with copyright. And if a bulletin board system contains material that infringes copyright, the old law used to be the doctrine of contributory infringement or vicarious liability would hold that site responsible. But under the DMCA, it shields an ISP from liability for the contributory infringement if it accommodates copyright protection devices and terminates repeat offenders. What does that mean? What it means is that once again, in the terms and conditions portion of your website, you need to have these terms and conditions in there indicating that in the event that you get a copyright violation, that somebody sends you the cease and desist, that you're going to take some action and that you're going to terminate the repeat offenders. That will shield you from civil liability for taking down access to the infringing material. I want to skip here to Barnes versus Yahoo real quick. Love this case. Barnes' former boyfriend posts nude pictures of her on Yahoo. All right, you can just see how this is going to play out. So Barnes contacts Yahoo demanding that they take down the offending content. Yahoo says, yeah, absolutely, we agree. Those nude pictures need to come down. They weren't put up with your permission. Sure, we'll take them down. And then they don't do it. Weeks go by. Months go by. She's mad as heck. So she sues Yahoo. And Yahoo says, wait a minute, Communications Decency Act. We don't have liability for this. We don't have to take it down. And the court comes back and says, yeah, that's right. You do not have liability for the torts committed by your users. So as long as you comply with the Communications Decency Act provisions on creating the statement within your terms and conditions, that is a true statement. The CDA will protect you, and you shouldn't have to worry about the user-generated content getting you into that kind of trouble.
Michael, I want to save a little time for questions. But...
Yes, I'll stop there.
Okay, right.
And
Good.
The deck pack you'll get has a couple of extra slides in it, and feel free to email me with questions.
Questions for Michael or Ariel about kind of legal issues?
Yeah, we had a specific case actually just the other day where somebody posted a story that was attacking and accusing this guy of being a crook. And it was a sort of a reported story. I don't really know exactly if it was true or not, but you know, the guy complained, and my understanding from what you said and even previously was that we don't necessarily have a responsibility to take that down, even if we're given a cease and desist, right?
That's correct.
Unlike if it were a copyright issue where we would have a responsibility to take it down.
Well, and it, maybe even under copyright, you might not have a responsibility, depending upon Section 512 safe harbor provisions. You can disable the link, you can take it down, and you have no civil liability if you do. But there may be a situation where you don't want to take it down for some reason. But I would say with the Communications Decency Act, in a case of what appears to be libel per se, I think you would have been within your rights to leave it up. It was not your content. Yeah?
The question always comes up with like comments to blog posts or this neighborhood news site, and you know, how often do you police it? And you know, because you see other sites and it's like, you know, crazy stuff, and you know, and occasionally will someone say, "Oh, this guy's a crook," and you know, it's an anonymous post, and I'm like, well, and do I leave this up and sort of, you know, under CDA just basically ignore it, or do I, you know, I'm aware that thinking, well, you know, this is not substantiated, do I just press delete? And you know, are you getting yourself in trouble by basically, you know, making that decision to delete or not delete, or should we just go ahead and, you know?
I don't think you, I think if you have a proper CDA Section 230 policy, I don't think you have anything to worry about either way you go on that. The only time I think you're going to have a problem is if the comments are going to violate some other law. Let me give you an example of this, because this was on Craigslist. There was somebody was posting in the roommates section something to the effect of, you know, derogatory term, insert here, need not apply for this apartment. Okay? I think, personally, aside from how horrendous the slurs were, is the question of whether or not that violates the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Because I think under the Fair Housing Act, I think there's a real question about whether or not you're fostering that, whether you're fostering some kind of discrimination. So I guess in answer to your question is, if it goes beyond, if it's going to be a threat, if you as a reader, as a reasonable person, would view that as a threat or a true discrimination, actionable discrimination, I'd take it down in a heartbeat. But if it's just opinion, I don't think I'd have any trouble leaving it up there at all. But I think CDA 230 gives you immunity in either event. Yeah?
We have we developed a UGC section of our website, and our lawyers told us that we couldn't edit any of the material, either had to be totally deleted or left up, because if we did any kind of editing for style, grammar, trimming it, or even if one little fact was wrong about where an event was occurring, if we did any editing of it, we assumed liability for it and could be held to be liable. So either leave it up or delete it, but those were only two options.
My feeling is that your lawyer is probably more conservative than I am. And what I would tell you is put in your terms and conditions that you reserve the right to edit anything that goes on the website. You reserve the right to change it. You reserve the right to make it inaccurate. Put that in the terms and conditions. And then how does somebody complain? So if they say that the speed race is going to be on Friday night at such and such a location and you change it to Saturday, I don't see how they can complain. And I think that as long as you're complying with CDA 230, I think you'll be okay. At least that's the way it should be. And I think if there's any question about it, EFF.org would take your case and defend you.
So on our site, anything can write, and then we choose articles that we think have high credibility, and we place them on the front page. When we place an article on the front page, are we taking any additional liability? So in other words, does it somehow become ours? Have we essentially edited it by changing the placement of the article?
And I think that the answer to that again is no, as long as that's reserved to you within the terms and conditions. You make it clear that you're going to do this. You reserve all questions of editorial control, placement with other photographs, placement with other articles. I don't think that they've got much that they can complain about.
Does that open us up to liability for defamatory content then? So if there's something defamatory placed on the front page and someone came back to us and said, well, that's defamatory, you have to take it down. Is it now kind of our article too because we took some action?
If you if you edited it so that it now is defamatory, I would say yes. But if the, you know,
If we just, if our editorial board placed it initially.
yeah, I don't see an issue. I think that you're in the clear. Just make sure your terms and conditions deal with it. You had a question a second ago, and
Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
yeah.
I have a question about photographs. If you take a photograph just of in a public place and post it on your website, does anyone have the right to ask you to take it down because they're pictured?
If they're in it. Okay, if they are in it and they're recognizable, the slide I had up said that it's governed by the naked eye test. If I can determine that that's you and it's on my website, yeah, absolutely. They've got a valid claim, unless you can find a way to make it newsworthy, they've got a valid claim to make you take it down or pay damages under the right of publicity laws. Seems wrong, but that's, you know, even if they're out in public. Let me take that one step further. So I have a client who says, you know what I'm going to do? This is all digital photography. I can Photoshop it, and I'll make the men look like women, and I'll make the women look like men, and nobody will know the difference. Well, now you've engaged in direct defamation because you've made somebody look bad. So you can't do that either. So if you don't have a release, I wouldn't risk running those photographs if they're recognizable.
But that doesn't apply if it's news, right?
That doesn't apply if it's news. Yes?
Just to do a follow-up with that. But does it mean like even the person's in public place?
Even in a public place, unless that's part of a news story. So somebody walking through the background while you're doing an interview, that's part of your interview is part of the news. If you're doing a story on the LA County Fair and you've taken a photograph from the entrance of the fair, it's part of the newsworthiness of the story. I think that you're going to be okay. But if you're at a private party and you take some pictures that are, you know, less than flattering of your neighbor, I mean, you don't have the right to put those up on your website unless it's part of a story.
So the fashion photographer for the New York Times who takes all those street scenes, he's getting releases from each of them?
Yeah, I suspect the answer to that is absolutely not. He's running the risk. And I think that the answer to that question is, it is a risk. But if he gets sued, think of all the great publicity. I mean, if nothing else, you know, all of the Obama posters that came out, look at the amount of publicity that you get if you were the guy from the AP who took the original photograph. Go ahead.
Well, my question's along that line. What if they pose for you?
Well, there's an implied endorsement and an implied permission, and I think that that's fine. What I would say is that I would have, if I were out there doing man-on-the-street interviews, I would have a 2-sentence, is it okay with you if you talk with me? Are you willing to do that? Thank you. And if I could do it, I'd record it. I'd be comfortable with that. Yeah.
One more question. A, how do people on Flickr get away with that? If I post my Flickr photos, and B, I was reading about a blog insurer. I'm wondering if you've read about these special liability insurance policies that were liable, designed for bloggers, but I wasn't sure if those have been tested or if they weren't.
Well, it's funny you mentioned here. Let me just put up that slide for a second, because you'll see that last item on there says purchase insurance. There is great media insurance that's available at very low cost, and I've got to tell you, some of the best companies in the world are writing it, and they will defend you any place in the world that you get sued. It doesn't cost much. Now, granted, if you're a startup, you don't have any money for insurance, but if you're willing to bet the farm, bet the farm. But realistically, buying insurance is always a good bet, and it's a better way to go. But in answer to your question about people taking pictures on Twitter or on Facebook, and they put those photographs up and it gets spread out over 1 million different locations, yeah, I think it's a potential risk. And I think that we're going to have to come up with some better answers than saying, okay, go litigate that question. In most jurisdictions, if it's a copyright question, you send out the cease and desist letter, and now there's the safe harbor. If you take it down, you're not going to be sued for that. We don't have a similar provision in the right of publicity stuff. So that if somebody's photograph shows up on your website and you get a phone call asking you to take it down, if you can't justify having that photograph on your website as part of a story, a newsworthy event, I think that you're going to have a problem. And we don't have a good solution.
Let's make this the last question.
The right of publicity thing, that's just a California law, right?
Well, I think there are 43 states with right of publicity laws, and they vary state by state. California is the worst, relatively. From the First Amendment perspective, California law is really, really difficult. New York is also a very strict state, but California, the Sederup case a few years ago, really created a bad situation where if you are putting up photographs after the event, you're not going to come within newsworthy, and you're not going to get First Amendment protection.
That's only if people are in California that you come to California.
Well, good question. What if I'm in Nevada and I happen to see it from Nevada? Can I sue you in Nevada? The website's visible from Nevada? I mean, can I sue you under California law in Nevada? Maybe. Maybe. You just don't want to find out. That's why it goes back to his question. Buy some insurance. It's cheap. They'll give you a lawyer for free, and they'll fly the lawyer all over the world to defend you. All right, thanks.
Thank you very much. So we're now headed into our last lightning round, and our first speaker will be Anh Do, who is the new managing editor of the LA.Spot.usc. Welcome.
Can I have a show of hands of those who have heard of Spot.usc? Oh, great. I had heard about it after it launched and had been following what's been going on. And so I'm really excited to be part of it now. And the idea is...
Can you just be a little closer to
Sure.
if you wouldn't mind? Sorry. This doesn't work. The idea is to have an open experiment. And the open experiment is to try to invite people to contribute to hiring reporters to pursue projects. In this age, it's so hard to fund different kinds of stories. And all of us, whenever we log online or pick up a paper, and we see certain stories that are already published, we think, how did that story ever get into print? Why did they pursue this angle versus that angle? Why don't they do this? Why didn't they talk to so-and-so? How about taking this other approach and localizing it this way? We're kind of like an armchair quarterback and having so many opinions about it. But here's a chance that I think for the public as community members to take a role in that and help shape the story from concept to execution. What people do is you can either pitch a story, or if you have an idea as a reporter, post it online and see how we can go about funding it. Members of the public log in and they make donations. We usually recommend the average amount to be somewhere around $20, but you know, it's totally open. And then we list a fundraising goal. And then we track how much is raised. And meanwhile, while the reporter is out trying to beef up community support for this, they can either do it through their inner circle, their family, friends, through, instead of giving me a Christmas present, how about you donate to my story idea? Or instead of a birthday present, please contribute to this. Another way which I think would be good is our job is to go out and sell the story to news publishers. There are 3 elements involved in this kind of concept. One is the reporters, second is the news publisher, and third is you as a community member donating. We try to bring the idea to potential news publishers, whether they be in print, online, radio, television, and say, this is a story that might suit your market, your audience, your readership, your viewers. How about you connect with us, and then we'll see about working together on this. And when we have a news publisher signing on, then spot us, the people behind it. We back out of the editorial process, and we let those people control the content and the guidance and how the thing is reported. What's fascinating to me about this is how we can involve all different elements of the community together. It's an open experiment. It's not the ultimate answer to what do we do with the problem of journalism, but I think it is an answer. Has anybody in the audience ever contributed to a story on Spot.us? Can I ask what motivated you?
Most recently, what motivated me?
Yeah, and what was the story?
Most recently, it was the garbage patch, the Pacific garbage patch story, and it motivated me because I thought it was valuable, and I thought it would be useful for the readership of my project, which is another
Do you live
North Bay news
in the Bay
organization.
Area?
I live in Santa Rosa. Yeah, Sonoma County.
Frank?
I contributed to the Proposition 13 story. I think it's an interesting element that should be explored. How certain country clubs and other businesses are kind of skirt around the change of ownership just to retain the low Proposition 13 base, tax base.
Just as a reader, what motivated you to do that? Did you see it not covered elsewhere and you needed to?
Yeah, I don't think it's been explored, but you know, I also just thought it was an interesting concept. I want to see where this goes. I think it's worth
it's interesting to me how in mainstream journalism, this is sort of like an innovative thing. But in community journalism, this has already been going on. Though they don't have a specific website dedicated to it, they go around and ask potential nonprofits or other educational institution, businesses, local mom and pop businesses. They ask them, do you want to contribute to this story? Do you want to see it done? So I think there's a way that we could connect both of us. When we are able to sign on, like say with the Pacific garbage patch story that was published in the New York Times in the science section several weeks ago, when we're able to sign on somebody like that, we refund the donors, and a lot of times the refund is in a form of a credit, so they can keep that money and donate to another story. I wanted to tell you that we'll be exploring advertising models, and that's going to be something coming up in the near future. But we're not going to be making money from this because we're classified as a nonprofit. Has anybody ever wanted to pitch a story rather than donate?
So we've pitched a lot of stories.
So Oakland Local's done at least 3 stories
Right.
that spot us in the 7 weeks we've been alive as a publisher.
I think that's great. Thank you. The site originally launched about a year ago, and it was the idea of a guy named David Cohen. He won a contest and got funding from the Knight Foundation. And I just thought, you know, if only this model could be replicated, not just in the Bay Area where it launched, but in other areas. And so the first experiment of that is in LA, and then we'll hopefully go on to bring it to other markets. One of the really interesting things I think is with its partnership here at Annenberg, there's a possibility that once it gets going, we could introduce it in the classrooms and get student involvement and track that. You know, we don't want it to be known specifically solely as a student project, but we want to involve different generations of people who can be journalists and who can produce information. Who out there has actually done a lot of freelance for a lot of the organizations that are featured here at the conference today?
That's a lot of freelance, not necessarily organizations, but public media.
Public media.
PR,
Mm-hmm. Is it hard for you to sell yourself as freelancers, do you think?
Yeah, actually it is. I found I had to put on a marketing.
Speak up.
I have to put on a marketing hat, just as, in addition to the journalist hat. So a lot of times I have to sell the stories before I actually write the story. And I actually did a story package for Spot Us about 6 months ago on toxicities in West Oakland. And that was one of the more pleasant ones because you didn't have to actually sell anything. You just told David the story, and they went out and got the money for it. So it was a pleasant experience.
I want to encourage you, because if you sign on with us, rather than have to do all of the work this gentleman is doing, like groundwork with selling yourself, we partner with you. We introduce your work to different kinds of audiences, and we try to connect you to potential publishers and resources. And when you do a story, you know, the person that works with you is called peer review editor, and they guide you every step of the way. And that person in the past has been a volunteer, but we are trying to get funding to actually pay people like that, because I don't want people to have to volunteer so much of their time to do, you know, good work and for a good cause. I believe, you know, just like student internships, we should give some kind of stipend to be fair for people's time. We're going to be holding a writing session early next year here at Annenberg to help freelancers who may want to work with us or who may want to find out ways in which you can get your material out there and get it published faster, more efficiently. So I hope that, you know, at that time some of you will come back, and if you're interested in that from what you're here today, please let me know. May I answer other questions, please?
I read about this in a Knight Awards and was very interested in it. And I wondered how you get away from the potential conflict of interest there might be with people. You're sort of having a story and people are donating. Maybe they suggested the story and then people are donating, hoping that you're going to have a certain outcome for the story. So it might
like
bias.
they could influence the angle?
Yes.
We put a cap on how much they can donate, and it's usually 20% of whatever the story costs. You know, some of them might cost as little as $500 to do, and that's mostly the money that's being paid to the writer. Some of them can go up as much as $5,000, but as a singular donor, you can only do up to 20%. Yes, sir?
How does this translate to for communities that aren't necessarily going to donate to this? You know, the stories will be much easier to find to areas that are
Poor communities. Can we answer that?
Sure.
So, so Quan and I have a history from Spot Us. It predates Oakland Local because Quan, we were involved in something called the West Oakland Toxic Tour. West Oakland has one of the highest incidences of pollution because there's a large port there, but it's one of the largest ports of entry like Long Beach, and there's a lot of diseases that, you know, asthma and things. So actually this has been an incredible vehicle to fund stories that have a stronger environmental or social justice component that mainstream media might not be interested in funding, or that a blogger might not take on by themselves is too ambitious. So we actually got funding to do a 3-part series with really intense documentation, documenting what was going on.
Yeah, and a lot of the times there are community groups who actually pitch the stories. And a lot of these times there are community groups who are working with communities with just hand-to-mouth organizations who might not have the funds but who just really want this story to be told. And to kind of make sure that the story doesn't get influenced, I'm not sure who asked the question, but that actually happened with our story series. There was the possibility of that. But David and his team were really good with making sure that I knew that I just wrote the story the way the story needed to be written and not to worry about the separation of church and state. They were kind of the buffers between me and the public, people who were paying money for it. So they were really good about making sure it didn't happen.
I think, you know, what you mentioned, the divide between the have and the have-nots, it's part of our job to go out there and create these connections and network. And if we can get some foundation funding or specific nonprofits who are experts in a particular area that we want to cover, we can work with them. And so that resolves the money issues and allows us to step back and just focus on the journalism.
Let's make this the last question.
Are the stories distributed beyond Spot.us once they're paid for, or just
yes,
on
the finished content is republished free under a Creative Commons license. But if you as a news organization signs on to take over the story and supports it at least 50% financially, then you have the exclusive right. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thanks very much. I'm a big Spot.us fan too. I contributed. One of the early projects I think was kind of the decline of the Bay Area media, and so I was a contributor to that project. But I just think it has tremendous potential. So Scott Flodin is going to be our next speaker, editor of TotalCapital.com, which covers California political news and information. Scott.
Thank you very much. Total Capital is a political news website that is an aggregator at its core, at its base. And we started this, business partner Gino DiCarlo and I started this about 5 years ago. And one of our goals was to get on an even playing field the content generated by independent media elevated with the content from the mainstream media, which is much easier to find. So our news aggregator filters out political news stories throughout the state, about 150 sources, and we have a database directory of names, and so it compares stories and names, and it uses those keywords and names as a way to determine if the story is political in nature and if it's related to California. Our target audience is political professionals, campaign consultants, and legislative staffers, as opposed to citizens and voters. This website is a little bit more inside baseball, and our community is mostly people based in Sacramento, but throughout the state. We do cover, we do aggregate news articles from local media all over the state, and including county and city elections and issues. How do I go to the next page? There we go. So this is our home page. The news that comes in throughout the day, and it's all automated. We do have to kind of tend to it to make sure it's working as it should, but we do. It is automated. So stories that come in are listed chronologically here, and the stories that are most popular by clicks move to the top. And it's primarily California sources, but we do get we do aggregate from magazines and other national sources. And then the names that appear in the days in the last 24 hours appear here. And so our community that we're serving is really these people who need to know. My analogy I use is fantasy sports. You need to know the littlest detail. Nothing is too small. And if you are working on a campaign, or if you're a legislative staffer for a specific person, you really need to keep up with what they're doing every single day. Then the people. Okay, so then we send out twice a day. We send out a news email that's more or less a snapshot of the news that has come in that morning, 8 a.m. roughly, and then 4 p.m. So for the hardcore people interested in California news, they can get it by email. This is an example of a page of a specific person. Now, what we've done to try to enhance a community of political professionals is put in some Web 2.0 tools. And one of them is kind of a wiki-based system where anybody who's logged in as a free service, free membership, can add details to pages and news that might not have been reported in mainstream news or blogs. Then they can put details right here on the page. This is further down the same. This is further down the same page, showing history. We collect other data for state politics, including past election results and the staffers in the Capitol that work for legislators is all listed here. This is another Web 2.0 kind of deal where members can update if our information appears to be outdated or inaccurate. Then our readers can log in and make those fixes themselves. A lot of times they'll send us an email and say, look, you got it wrong. And what we're finding is we're really needing to get more of our community working with our website instead of just reading it, actually interacting with it. We need to make some of these tools a little more plain, a little more simple, so that people can engage with it more easily. This is an example of other data we collect of a specific legislative district which has past election results, and a little bit lower down is voter registration for the district. So as we started with just being a news aggregator, that was never our end game. It was trying to become pretty much everything. We wanted to put a website together where anybody who's interested in a highly detailed way in California politics can come to this one spot and find whatever they need. And this is our latest sort of just testing in a beta form right now, but this is going to be legislation and bills going through the Capitol in a highly detailed way, showing recent votes, previous versions of bills, and we're going to be able to get this running in January when the state capitol resumes from the recess. Now, along with the bills, we are trying out something new to engage our readers more, and that is for bill tracking, legislation tracking. So what we're going to offer to our readers, anyone who signs up, will be able to search for any legislation they're interested in by legislator, by topic, by bill number, and store it into their sort of personalized list. And with their morning email, their afternoon email, they will get updates if anything's moved, if anything's changed. And what we're also hoping that our readers will become involved with is to write their own descriptions of what the bill means to them, their point of view, and share that with everyone else. So some of the bill language, as you can imagine, is a little bit dry, and it would be nice for a more simplified 1 or 2 sentence version of what that bill means to them. And then we can use that to not only show which bills and which legislation topics appear to be more popular and watched more closely, but also to show viewpoints of both sides, or more than 2 sides of any issue. So we do sell advertising. That's our model. We have 3 placement spots at the top. But we also offer other packages. If an advertiser comes to us and says they want 1 week of higher exposure, then we may offer them custom advertising package, whatever they need. The website is all. Let me give you a little bit of background about myself. I worked in journalism and newspapers for 10 years. I worked 9 years at the Sacramento Bee as a news artist, information graphics. And I left newspapers in 2003 to start freelance business, independent business. And I was about half and half print and web. And it was becoming clear that most of my clients were interested in getting away from print, moving to web. So I focused all my efforts on that. This website was, who's now my business partner, was originally a client of mine, and said, you know, in Sacramento, in state politics, and said, you know, there isn't a website that has everything. So we set out to build it as a side project. So this is something I work on, and my business partner works on at, you know, as we can, as much as we can. The idea being that the more revenue we get, the more time we can put into it. Here's some statistics. It's been about 5 years, so we've had some time to build our audience, but it's still not to where we want it to be. But I did want to point out that we had a peak when this was in October, and the governor vetoed a bill by Assemblymember Amiano, or Senator Amiano in the Bay Area, and there was sort of a cryptic message read vertically, and it became a national news story. And Michael Arrington on TechCrunch linked to us, and we got a big hit. And it really showed us more than we should have been paying attention to this, that the majority of our visitors comes through Google search. The core audience and the community that we're trying to build is not to the point that we want it to be. So we need to make a greater outreach to that. And about 25% of our readers are outside of California, and which really surprised us. That's something we didn't expect. So the one last thing I wanted to mention regarding revenue is this bill tracking system. We are considering going to experiment with like a freemium program. I don't know if anyone's mentioned that today, where we would allow anyone who wants to monitor a handful of bills, maybe 4 pieces of legislation that they're interested in, but for professionals who would use this as part of their work, to charge a monthly fee, very small, I'm sure, because we need to keep our costs low to have a large community come in. But I'm curious, has anyone experimented with any kind of either premium or a pay subscription that would deliver more content or different content? Has anyone done anything like that? Have you done that?
We talked about earlier, kind of give away tickets on our websites.
Right. So if you're not a subscriber, you're not.
Well, everybody, we don't restrict content.
Okay. Just other services.
Yeah, we give away tickets to local events and stuff.
Okay.
And we give them the color comments bar. So
right, and that's been successful for you, I think, right?
It's been it could be successful.
Yeah, that's what. So that's what we're gonna try also.
I wouldn't restrict content ever.
Well, what I'm considering though is not the content's there. Everybody gets it, but it's the amount that you would use it. You see what I'm saying? I think there's a possibility that some people would use it as if you're a voter, if you're a citizen, and you're interested in a few key issues, this might work for you for free. But if you're a professional and you need to use this as part of your work, then you'd be willing to pay for it. So that's another model we're looking into. So that's basically it. Any questions? Yes.
Would it feel, or just, how about just this? Just reply to me. I'm just going to be a devil's advocate.
Sure,
and
yeah.
you can reply to it. It's unethical for you to not inform the public about the key issues that are going on at the state. And you started your publication, understandably, to inform the public.
Mm-hmm.
And so now in order to keep it sustainable or to somehow make a profit, you're going to lessen the amount of information available to everyday citizens. And that may make the key information to push legislation through, that may be held by those in power who have the money to get the access to that key information versus the regular everyday citizens who don't have the money and maybe not even have the money to be online in the first place, but don't have the money. So you're kind of making more uneven the information distribution on key political decisions. I'm just playing devil's advocate.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I don't disagree with you, but what I'm hoping, and we're going to have to play this, what I'm hoping is that we can continue to offer everything we build for free, but for people who need a mass quantity of the service, that might be something they need to pay for. You're right. So anybody could have 5 bills that they track or 5 issues that they track or something, but for the people who need to use this every day for part of their business, then perhaps that's something that we would charge for. But so I hope that answers your question, and I hope that the answer is that no, we're not trying to restrict anybody from anything. So I hope so. Yes.
Well, I would sort of play the devil's advocate from the opposite side, which is to say, you know, what you got here is a pretty robust, essentially professional information service aimed at insider professionals, almost a newsletter type model, and professionals who have very high need for very specific kinds of information and generally willing to pay for that.
Right.
So, you know, why not make it a paid service that's aimed at the 10,000 insiders?
Yeah, or maybe 1,000.
And charge them $200 a year or something.
Those are the kinds of questions that we're asking right now to figure out. But because this is free, I mean, the information that we're providing is publicly available to everybody. We're just packaging it up in a nice way. So I do want to continue to offer that for free. We don't have to pay for the information, so we shouldn't charge people for it. But the additional service that we're bringing is allowing people to keep a little container that tracks everything for them. So that might be worth some money.
Last question.
I'm sorry, this is not a very philosophical last question.
It's okay.
When you have the information or links to information about bills, is that available regardless of whether or not you are using this specific?
Oh yeah, yes, absolutely.
Okay, so the information is there, just like that personalized list of it might be something you have to pay for.
Yeah, the list where you can kind of enhance the service for your business needs. Content. Yeah, but basically in this mock-up here, this part is your personal information, which is private to you, unless you want to share it with the group. And this is what's public. So that would.
Great.
So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Scott. Eddie North-Hager is. Oh, is he here?
Yeah.
He's here. Okay.
He's here.
So next we're going to go to Jake Bayless, who is founder and editor for Empire Report. Jake, thank you.
Thank you. They missed their cue. They were supposed to start the drum roll right now. First of all, I wanted to say thank you. I think that this kind of forum is fantastic. It's part of what I'm going to talk about. My understanding coming here was that I needed to share my greatest idea so far with Empire Report, and so I'm going to get into that in a second. But again, I want to mention that I'm really humbled to be amongst so many people who are not afraid to experiment and try new things and be a part of this whole change in paradigm. I think it's a whole lot of fun. My background is as a technologist. I work for a city government in Santa Rosa, and I am the web administrator. And so I find I have a whole lot of opportunity to be a proponent of open government and sharing data and information. Getting myself into Empire Report was sort of an extension of that, trying to figure out a better way to share that information as well as other things with the community and get them to share with themselves other stuff. I wanted to make a comment really quickly. Is Amra still here?
I think not.
No, okay.
maybe she's watching, or maybe she will watch later. I think that the allvoices.com website idea is absolutely fantastic, and I would make a plea, a special plea, perhaps to the Knight Foundation, to purchase it and make it open source, because I think it's the kind of technology that would serve a much broader, greater good, something that could be scalable to a very small level to neighborhoods, but is completely out of reach. $9 million to develop that technology is not something that a local media organization, even one perhaps backed by the Times, can do. And so that's something that occurred to me that would be worthwhile to say. Something I've been waiting for, something very broad like that to come out of the Knight News Foundation. I also wanted to quickly point out that there's a little bit of irony. I know there's some flaws in this logic, but the Google blog that originally announced the publication rules where people would be able to have 5 free clicks to get into a news article from one of the larger organizations, that it seems sort of ironic to me that that blog entry was profited on by the news organizations. It's a little bit of a shift going on there. So Empire Report is just another one of the many. I don't profess to tell you things that you already know. I know that there have been a lot of people here who have been talking about things that I think about all the time, a lot of great ideas, and so I'm not really going to delve into all of the details about our demographics and where we are and everything else. What I really want to talk about is the great idea. But before I do that, we've got a couple of premises with Empire Report that we started off with. The first was that print is unsustainable long term, except perhaps as a tiny cost per issue special customer luxury. And that's something that I think we'd like to get into in the future, but it's not something that we're ready to do yet. The other was that national and international news is saturated. It's not a focus that my neighborhood necessarily wants to see more of. My neighborhood is lacking the neighborhood information. Again, something you probably know. And we believe, there's a group of 4 or 5 of us who are the governing board for Empire Report, a pending nonprofit, that nonprofit is the way to go, that the best method to build credibility and transparency is through a nonprofit model. Not that we wouldn't be non-revenue. Certainly revenue is going to be a big part of our model. Empire Report is only a year and a half old, but nonprofit was our hot ticket. And then the other thing that that is really a basis for Empire Report, and I think it's a basis for a lot of our other news organizations, hyper-local news organizations, is this feeling of an emergent inward focus among communities, that people are really looking to reconnect with their neighbors. They're looking to get to know one another better than they had before. Certainly, perhaps ways that they did back in the 50s and 60s, where you really kind of knew who, and I didn't live in the 50s and 60s, but they tell me neighbors knew each other, and that's not something that is so much anymore. It's something that's changing the paradigm. So Empire Report's target area is the North Bay, and we're entirely based on experimentation. Experimentation is the basis for everything that we're doing. And so we also have a luxury right now of being no profit and very little expense. With the exception of me out of my own pocket coming to something like this, the ongoing monthly expense of Empire Report is about $50. And $50 keeps the site up and running. That's not sustainable. It's not something that we see happening for the long term, but it gives us the luxury of experimentation, trying new things, finding people who are really passionate about it and want to stick with it. It's a way of vetting journalists. It's a way of vetting editors. It's certainly a way for the community to get a feel for us and build a rapport, and so on. So the big idea is much like what we're doing right here. I've become, whether I like it or not, a professional observer of what's going on in the news industry right now. And all of you are probably too. I know I'm preaching to the choir a lot here. But one of the things that I've noticed is that media organizations are really sort of spinning in circles and talking to themselves a lot and trying to come up with the best model. And I don't see that as doing a whole lot of good. And I finally came to the realization that what I really needed to do if I wanted to have Empire Report connect with the community was to ask the community what it was that they wanted from us. And it was something that nobody had ever done before in our community. Sonoma County in the North Bay is anchored by a regional New York Times organization called the Press Democrat. And the Press Democrat, of course, is a very viable organization, I think, compared to many of the other regional organizations. But it's fairly insular, as you might expect. And I thought it was time to reach out to the community. And so what happened was, as some of you probably have happened too, a professor at the local university, Santa Rosa Junior College, called me up and said, would you and maybe another guy who is on your governing board come and talk to my class? I have a sociology class called Social Problems, and I'd really like to have somebody from Empire Report come and talk to this class about what Empire Report represents when it comes to the problem of the media and the lack of a robust accountability journalism environment in the North Bay. And I thought, well, that would be great, but it didn't work with our schedules, so I suggested, well, why don't we just raise the bar a little bit? Why don't we reserve one of the auditoriums at the junior college and invite the community in? And lo and behold, it got great traction. It was put together in about 3 weeks flat, which I think beats the record for putting this together, doesn't it? But it operated in a very similar way to what we're here doing today, which was we have this premise, some ideas and some topics, and we wanted to get a group of people to come and talk about it. And so that's what we did. Here you can see Empire Report. I'll just cruise my way over to the calendar. Feel free to ask any questions here while I go along. So just on Wednesday night, we had this gathering. As you all probably know, a really important part of building a community media organization is building relationships with people who are passionate about news and information and government and community and neighborhoods and everything else. And so I had built up a list of friends, people who are supporters of Empire Report, and all of whom are really sort of luminaries in our neighborhood about news and information. Here are the invitees. Cynthia Boas is a writer for truthout.org and Huffington Post. She lives, all of these people are local to us, by the way, which was something that was necessary for me to justify inviting them. Cynthia Boas for Huffington Post and Truthout. She's also a professor at Sonoma State University of Political Science. Nancy Dobbs, who is the president and CEO of our local PBS affiliate, KRCB. Peter Phillips, who some of you may know of, who is just the recent outgoing director for Project Censored at Sonoma State University. Greg Ritzinis is the interactive editor at the Press Democrat, our local long-term, century-old news organization. Really the elephant in the living room, a very powerful organization that's been around that a lot of people, unfortunately, are really dissatisfied with. But I wanted to make sure that if we were going to have an open panel discussion and inviting the community, that somebody was there, or at least invited to be there to represent the PD. And of course, Norman Solomon, who is an activist, founder of the Institute for Public Accuracy, which some of you may know is a resource for journalists also. And I was lucky enough to sit on it also. But it, again, was... It was fantastic. It was a great opportunity to dialogue with the community about what they want, what's going on, what's missing in their news, what's missing in their community. It was a way to connect dots. It was a way to humanize what's going on with Empire Report, something that I don't think is ever done, really, with traditional mainstream media. And that was a great opportunity for us to reach out to our community. That's it. Any questions? Yes?
So what was the result after the meeting? What kind of input did you get?
You know, the people that we got, I think, largely were activists, political entities, people who follow politics, as well as some politicians. A lot of students. Empire Report has some great relationships with the local universities and even some instructors who have worked in our model to their curriculum so that their students are encouraged to dialogue with the community that lives around them. And that was largely it. That was the makeup of it. But what we found was that it created so much buzz in such a short period of time, and there were so many questions that we didn't have time to address. It was short. It was just for 2 hours that we've already scheduled the next one. And so we're going to have a series, a community forum on the media for our region. And the next one is February 2nd. It should be a lot of fun. Yes?
So you mentioned that your nonprofit status is pending. Have you already worked out some connections in the foundation community to possibly start funding yourself?
Right now, we're in the midst of putting together the federal paperwork, and so no. I mean, we have a tremendous amount of connections. Again, there's a lot of freedom, I think, that we have in not having those relationships yet, because we have this robust environment using open source technology with a couple of people who kind of monitor it in their spare time. We're not beholden to anybody. That's always going to be a goal. But we also are operating on our own timeline. And I think that that's really, really important for us because, one of our big things is wanting to be able to experiment with whatever moves us. You know, if it's a matter of putting up a Picasso gallery on the home page and letting it cycle through some of the images, that's what we want to do. If it's a matter of putting a YouTube video or something that lives on our own server, or if we want to just clean slate, change it. We have that flexibility to do it now, and I don't know necessarily that we would if, as soon as we get into more thick relationships.
So you have freedom now, but are you putting a lot of time into it?
You know, it's spread out amongst a lot of people who have full or part-time jobs for the most part. I have a full-time job. This is something that I do sort of in the corners of my existence. It winds up taking up a lot of time, but I am still getting a tremendous amount of pleasure out of it, and I think most of the people who are doing it because they really enjoy it. It's a fun experiment. Yeah.
Jake, thanks for...
Talk a little bit about the traffic is like.
The traffic for Empire Report varies on the topic. There was, who was the last presenter? Scott? Yeah. Your traffic, I looked at the traffic results for our Google Analytics for the last month, and I thought, I'm not going to include that. It's not very impressive. But the reality is it has peaks and troughs, much like yours had that peak from the Schwarzenegger letter with the, yeah. Yes. And the same thing holds true. I think Santa Rosa, Sonoma County, and the North Bay right now, with what we're doing, is driven largely by search traffic and everything else. And so when something gets a lot of hits, it's getting a lot of hits because somebody knows something happened and they're putting it into Google and the traffic is coming from Google. To answer your question directly, on any given weekday we have between 150 and 800 unique viewers on any given weekday, and monthly I can't tell you what that is. I just don't know. It's very sporadic at this point, and it's sporadic based on content.
Thank you, Jake. That's great.
You betcha.
Leimert Park is a neighborhood not too far from here in Los Angeles, and Eddie North-Hager is going to talk to us about his new, not new, but about his blog that covers that neighborhood. Eddie?
Well, first I wanted to say thanks for having me. I watched from home this morning, and it was just fantastic to see all the different ideas and everything. I actually wanted to just start and tell you the story of how this all happened. And so I worked for about 15 years in newspapers and covered communities and different aspects of communities.
You'll have to speak up a little bit, Eddie.
Okay, sorry. So for about 15 years I worked at newspapers and covered local communities almost that entire time. I started out at the Idaho Press Tribune, circulation 19,000, and covered the county seat, the city that it was in, and everything that went on there. So I moved around a little bit, and about 5 years ago, luckily was able to move over to covering media relations at USC, and I took a class with Elizabeth Oster here about online communities. It's an Annenberg program where in about a year they teach you about developing online communities. And for that class I actually started Leimert Park Beat. And the reason I started it is because I'd gotten out of newspapers, but I still felt the need to be a citizen journalist. But, I could have started a blog and I thought about it, but, here there was an opportunity where I moved to a new place where, like when you're a reporter and you move to a new place, everybody's different. Everything's you're not necessarily someone who's from there and knows what's going on, and I didn't feel like I had the right expertise, especially when you consider that Leimert Park Beat is really the African American cultural center of the city. How do I put myself in that position, and how do I not be an authority on a subject that I don't necessarily have a right to be an authority on, which in a lot of ways is a lot different than being a reporter, where you are paid to be the authority on that, and there's not a lot of interaction. You get the story in the paper. So a social network where other people could direct the conversation, put in their own thoughts, and really be as weighted as I was on the same topics was a much better way to go about it. And what I find is that not only is it a better way to go about it, I think that it produces news. And a lot today, there's a, what about journalism? What is news? And I think there's a big disconnect when you talk about not necessarily community sites or regional sites or government sites, but hyper-local and super hyper-local, really, sites. And what Leimert Park Beat does, it is a news provider, and news is in what's new, where that word actually comes from, is what's going on. Something that, not just recently, but, more than 10 years ago, you could really see that, even larger cities, their bureaus from the LA Times or from different newspapers were all closing down. And so if you're from Silver Lake or Leimert Park or Echo Park or different places like that, there really isn't a place for you to get news about your community. And one of the things I realized when I started this is that there was more than enough news about, the blog downtown said it earlier today, about gritty Skid Row, and there's more than enough news about the crime that occurs in South Los Angeles, because that's all that's ever covered. This is news that isn't really effective for the people who live there. It's really news for people from the outside, and it kind of validates an image that people have gotten over time, and then you don't necessarily know much about the community except when something is newsworthy for NBC or newsworthy for the LA Times, which almost always involves some kind of crime. And it's not just true for this neighborhood, but if you think about MacArthur Park or Echo Park, those are all associated not with the rich diversity that is there or the thriving small businesses, but some kind of gritty feel that the rest of Los Angeles has put it into that kind of box. So I have to, because this is kind of my passion, and I am a for-profit company making no money whatsoever, but the idea is that I don't think you necessarily have to say you're a nonprofit in order to get the trust of the people that you're serving. Newspapers are not nonprofit. They're still expected to serve a purpose and serve a community need. Google is not nonprofit, and you can argue, but their mantra, "Do good," I think is something that most journalists feel, and I know that that's kind of what I'm doing here is something I'm giving them something and myself something that there would not be otherwise. So one of the things that the ways I'm going about is that I think that there is, and this is hard, it's more selling pizza 99 cents a slice rather than trying to get $8 for that whole pie, is that there are a ton of local businesses who can't advertise in the LA Times, it's too expensive, don't want to advertise in the recycler, it goes to 1,000 people that don't live in the neighborhood, but they are willing to pay $200 for the Chamber of Commerce that actually doesn't have hardly any information about how to contact that business, People don't go to a Chamber of Commerce website to shop in the neighborhood. So how much would it be worth for them to say, have a very targeted audience of their most loyal, likely their most loyal customers, the people who live around the block? So that's kind of the idea here, because Leimert Park Beat, and we'll go over to Leimert Park Beat is kind of a challenge if you think of it as making money. It's 1 square mile, about 7,000, 8,000 people. It's unincorporated, so there isn't actually a city hall to cover. The demographics are overwhelmingly African American. There's a below internet penetration there, below average. So, but what we've found is that there's still businesses there that need advertising, and if you think about how much it costs for the advertising they're using now, and they're not necessarily internet savvy, if you compare it to even making flyers, you could easily cause a symbiosis of being able to get advertisers from the local businesses.
Eddie, one minute.
So just wanted to let you know that the way we went about it is search engine optimization is very important. And if you look up Leimert Park on Google, it comes up first out of 600,000 hits. I really worked on that for a long time. Still, we are only about 2,500 visitors every month, but that's a quarter of the population for the area. So last night, just one quick thing. We're starting up my third neighborhood-specific website, really social networking site that includes the news. It's in Echo Park, and it's part of the Annenberg program on online communities, and we got some seed money to create this. And so we went around to the local businesses. It was our third kind of canvassing trip to kind of meet them and let them know what we're doing. And so, but really we don't know them at all. And we bought some gift certificates, and people were more than willing to match the amount of gift certificates. So it's like if we bought $50 in gift certificates, they were also giving us $50. And these are small businesses, just little boutiques and things. But I think it really speaks to the idea that there is a place for advertising. And, a lot of the advertising reps, if you find one, they often work on commission. So the person we're using now, and we've just started working with this, she charges 20%. And she sells for newspapers that don't have an online presence. And so she can ask them after she's done with that to say, and would you like an online ad? So. Any questions?
A couple things. First, I think you're spot on about how some organizations tend to exoticize subcultures and demographics. So how did you structure your editorial to not do that and to really serve the community you're focusing on rather than cover the community? And second question, how did you gain trust within the community? So a lot of times, just because of those different factors, cultures are really hesitant to allow other people to come in and cover them because they're afraid of the way it's going to look. So what did you do?
Well, for one thing, I live there. It makes it a lot easier. I do understand a lot more living in a underserved minority community, the way it's covered in the media, a lot more than I did when I covered the city of Carson. So I did try to take that into consideration, and I also kind of made the philosophical choice that I was going to be covering the community and not necessarily repeating the things that the mainstream press was going to cover anyway. As far as gaining trust, it takes a long time. The site is, my picture's on there, but otherwise it's pretty faceless. So I think just because I allow people to post other things they want to post, pretty much without moderating. Lately, we've been getting a lot of things from India, and so I make sure that that doesn't get on. But otherwise, the people who respond, and we have a pretty good bevy of contributors at their own pace. I think that when you allow someone a voice, and I think that's the difference between most newspapers, is they're still very much worried about allowing other people that voice, outside the comment section.
I noticed that you used names, and I wondered why you chose that and what your experience is.
Well, for out of the box, you get everything, and users are able to pick it up immediately, basically. It's drag and drop. It's very simple. I spend I'm guessing about $10 a month for the service. Everything I do is after work and just when I can. So that's why I chose Ning. On the next part I went to was Echo Park Online, and we were thinking we could use Ning too, but they recently have really closed their source code. So you can't really add anything to it. And it's still, all these things are very young, so there isn't a lot of API outside applications you can use. So we went with WordPress for that one.
So when you first started using Ning, it was more customizable?
You could change almost everything with it. You just needed to know how to do it.
Can I just follow up on that question? Are you using WordPress BuddyPress for the...
Right. And that's brand new too.
How's it work?
Well, it's almost there. The thing is that, if you've ever gotten an iPhone app and there's mistakes in it and things like that, and you might have to download it again later. Well, the iPhone apps are really popular, so they could have 100,000 users that are fixing these problems all at once, like Wikipedia. BuddyPress is much smaller, much more involved, so there's a lot of little glitches. But, 2 or 3 extra months of development, it's coming together.
Last question here.
On a weekly basis, about how many hours do you put, and how much does it translate roughly?
Translate into what?
On a weekly basis, about how many hours do you work on the site, and roughly about how much would that translate on labor?
Well, I do anywhere from 2 hours a week to 20 hours a week. It's really my time. One thing, you realize as a community blogger, you kind of have to just carry your camera with you all the time and use that to kind of put in, because although I write about Leimert Park a lot, people in Leimert Park like to know about other things that are going on, hiking and things like that, and so I do put that in there as well. Sometimes it's 20 hours a week when there's a parade and I'll do a movie. One thing that is really important is knowing when to jump on things. So when Barack Obama was in the throes of being elected, I did a lot of stories about that, and was surprised I was really the only media in Leimert Park, which is the African American Cultural Center of the city, was the only person there. There's thousands and thousands of people there celebrating. Just amazing on election night, and for the as well for they have the Martin Luther King Day parade, which was right as the inauguration was happening, and it just no one really picked up how historic that was. So I see that part of what I'm doing too is just chronicling something that wouldn't be written down if it wasn't for me and a lot of other people that are contributing to the site.
Great. Thanks very much, Eddie. It's really amazing, isn't it, how many opportunities there are to fill space in ways that you're able to serve underserved communities. It's just really striking. The award for patience goes to Tara Leonard and Maria Gaura, who are the founding editors of SantaCruzWire.com. Please. Thank you.
Well, I'm really appreciative that everyone's still here. It's really late. And you know, I have to say, it's really been eye-opening listening to everyone's stories. Before this point, I don't know anyone else who put together and ran a website. You know, we just came up with this. We came up with an idea. We figured out how to do it. We designed it ourselves. You know, looked at other sites and saw what we liked and wanted to emulate, and don't have a business plan, particularly. We're still on the fence. We're giving ourselves a year to work out the kinks and get it running before we really tried to make money off it. And especially after being here today, I think we're really considering a nonprofit model more than anything else, because it seems to go better with the kind of writing we want to do. But anyway, why don't you go ahead about how we got started?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we've only been up since about April of last year, and Maria has an extensive experience in journalism. She worked at the Chronicle for 11 years, I want to say. I was an editor back east at a community news corporation, and it's interesting because that was an actual print model of what a lot of you guys are now doing online, and we're starting to do online, which is, it was called the Community News Organization. It's based in Needham, Massachusetts, but what we did is we provided content to all of the hyper-local little news organizations all around the Boston area. So it's funny, I never really made that connection until I was sitting here thinking about it today. So what happened in Santa Cruz is that the paper of record is the Santa Cruz Sentinel, and about a year ago the Sentinel was bought out in quick succession twice. And in that process, they did a lot of layoffs. There was a lot of confusion about their identity. I think there still is, about what they're doing and where they're going. They physically took their office out of downtown Santa Cruz and moved it to a suburb north of the city, sort of in a strip mall. And all of these things gave members of the community a sense that that newspaper was changing and losing touch with sort of the day-to-day stories that people in Santa Cruz, sort of average person in Santa Cruz was interested in. So Maria and I stepped in and thought, okay, well, we'll just try this out. We'll fill a gap. We'll see if we can get any sort of readership at all. And like so many of you, it's just been this kind of experiment on a day-to-day basis to see what was going to happen. Mm-hmm. And also, like many of you, we haven't had really a problem getting enthusiastic readership. But now that we've been doing it for, coming up to a year, we both have other jobs, we both freelance, we both have kids. It's taken up a huge amount of our time, and so this issue of sustainability has continued to rear its ugly head, and that's why it was so great to come and get some of the suggestions here. But I would like to say one quick thing in a room full of journalists, which is I don't think we can completely turn over the concept of content to anybody who has a website or anyone who wants to write a blog. I think that as journalists, we have to continue to value journalistic integrity and content and be willing to come up with models that we're going to be willing to pay for that, and that things like fact-checking and things like sources and things like objectivity, however you might want to define that, continue to matter in our community as a whole, and that we have to come up with some sort of balance between being completely wide open and being transparent. So that's kind of where we are right now. You want to talk about that a little bit, because we didn't open that door yet?
Yeah, I went into this really just from a writer's point of view. I'd been writing for newspapers for almost 20 years, and I wanted to keep on writing after I left my last newspaper job, and we saw a lack of content. And so much of what we're doing, we write what's on the site. Until the past month, we've opened it up a little bit to guest writers. We're not paying them, obviously. We're not getting paid either. But I wasn't willing to do the Web 2.0 thing and open it up to the troll army out there either. I mean, I wanted to be a writer and not a policeman. But I think that we have to rethink some of that a little bit too. I mean, maybe doing more in the way of blogs and a little more interactivity, but I still don't see a huge value in anonymous commentary, especially on a hyper-local site where it is a town where people know each other. And if you
Santa Cruz is very small. It's a population of about 55,000 to start with. So as she was saying, one of the intermediary steps we've taken in the last month or maybe 6 weeks, is we sat down and identified sort of key players in the community, who already have expertise in something, and we've approached them about providing us content on their area of expertise and how that relates to issues that are going on in the community. So for instance, my husband's a marine biologist. He knows a lot of people in town who are involved in the environment movement, so we've been in conversations with them about providing content to the site on their area of expertise. We've been in touch with various people in law enforcement or on the city council or at the university to provide us relevant content on areas that they are experts in, to keep the credibility of the site, but take some of the burden off us to have to be constantly providing every single story, because as soon as the new content drops, you kind of lose that momentum and the hits go down. Talk about the advertising.
You know, we do have all these ads on the site, but they're free. This was one of our ideas, well, partly for design reasons, because we were designing the site as we went. And you know, it looks, they look nice, and but
are they telling you that they're getting any response from their ads?
I don't, you know, I don't have any way, I haven't set it up so I can measure that. I don't know how many click-throughs we're getting. And actually what's even ridiculous, I don't even know how many hits we get daily site-wide. We have it being measured per story. You know, so we have a really interesting view of, we really wanted to know what stories people were reading. And what's interesting is that, you know, I feel pretty good if we get 200 hits the first day on something. But what's interesting is it'll go up to thousands. They just keeps getting passed around, and people keep visiting the site, and the ones that have been there a while just keep ticking up, 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 up. So it's very hard to figure out the patterns when you look at it that way.
Yeah, we originally started with 4 people who were all writers. And of course nobody wanted to do the marketing side, and so we came up with this concept that we'd offer free ads for 6 months, and Maria got that off the ground. We made some connections and we got those ads up there. But there's just so much to do that, like, that's why we were here, to try to figure out how do you just manage the time of managing an advertising program. And you guys have given us some good suggestions. But I do think we've also heard enough to feel like, okay, we've got to open that door a little more in terms of providing other content from other people, because it's just too much of a burden for such a small organization. On the flip side of that being that in terms of feedback, people love it. They think it's great. They're so thrilled with the quality of it. And we do get a lot of feedback that people are happy that it's not just another aggregator. That it's fresh content, that it's new content, and that we're locals, and that we actually go and talk to 3, 4, 5 different sources and get actual journalism done. So that balance is really, I don't know, it's going to be an interesting progression for us.
But you know, one of the previous speakers made a comment very early on that you have to define what your idea's success is. And really, this is so small and it's so local, and you know, my goal for success would really be to make enough money, to bring in enough money somehow to pay the writers. And I would be perfectly happy with that, you know, and it's not, when you think about it in terms of what you'd like to achieve to make yourself happy, it actually sounds pretty doable, you know, after being here and listening to everyone else's input.
Any other questions?
Any questions?
Small postings, and then you would give them like a banner or something?
You mean have an advertiser like pay for
trade?
A trade.
Like you're giving them free advertising, and you're still looking for content to reduce your time of commitment. Could you say, I'll give you this banner ad or something like that? In return, can you post for me twice a week?
The advertisers would post a story?
Yeah.
Well,
they're not too interested in that, I think.
But see, that also gets right back to the heart of the issue for old school journalism about objectivity. I mean, you know, if you've been to journalism school as we were 20, 25 years ago, that was just like not done. And so that could be, clearly is more our stumbling block now than anything, but I don't think we want to just completely abandon that old school journalism sense of objectivity. I just think that we have to take smaller steps towards that in our model.
It could be like for a commentary on an issue going on in town, not like, you know, an investigative or like breaking news.
Right, right.
I'm not sure that we'd find with the kind of people who are advertising, I don't think they have a lot of interest in contributing content. They just want the eyeballs and they want to be seen, and a lot of them like what they read, but...
Maybe they'll take photos for you.
Oh, there you go.
If I could just mention something that kind of builds on that point. You had mentioned that trying to get groups around town, like marine biologists or people at the university or nonprofits or people like that to contribute. One thing that I guarantee that you'll run into is that you'll talk to people and they'll say, yeah, that's great, we'd love to contribute. And then you won't hear another word from them ever. And that happens all the time. So, but one possible way to combine that with your idea is to say, we will put up an ad for your little nonprofit institute if you will write a story for us. So in other words, find the people that you want to contribute and then offer them an ad, offer them an opportunity to market something that they want to market as an incentive to do it. So, just a thought.
And you can work with like a class at UC Santa Cruz.
Oh,
that you
actually, we have something like that going on right now. UC Santa Cruz doesn't offer a journalism degree, but they have a news writing journalism program, magazine writing, and a really well-known science writing program. And they are going to, their students are finishing up their semester projects now, and we've done a partnership, and we're going to start writing. And they've all been vetted by their professors. And so we're going to be doing some of that, and hopefully that'll get us through the holiday season. And a lot of that's pretty interesting. It's local environmental issues mostly.
Tara and Maria, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you all for your patience and stamina. It's been a long day, but a really, really interesting set of presentations. Just a couple of post-conference items I wanted to mention. First of all, website operators, if you haven't done the survey, please do that. There are surveys here. You can also do it online, but we prefer you pick one up. We will send back to you the results of that when the survey results are finished. We'll also send you a list of all of your colleagues who attended today, as well as those who were invited but not able to attend. So we'll give you kind of a long list there. And also we will make available the PowerPoint presentations that were made today. The video of today's proceedings will be up soon, maybe even as early as tonight, I understand. Next week, we'll flag you. We'll post some highlights of the conference next week, and we'll flag you when that's up as well. One question I think for those of us at USC is whether there might be some sort of continuing role for USC to play in terms of a convener, in terms of communication among you and your colleagues around the state, and so that would be something we'll probably be giving you a very short survey question about the conference and ask you some questions about whether you think that we at USC Annenberg might play a continuing role with the work that we do. Again, I want to thank you all for being here today. Such great presentations. Jonathan, thank you very much for your presentation. I also want to say a word about my colleague Monica Alba of the Center. She did a tremendous amount of work in being the coordinator for this conference, and also had some help from her buddies at the Center. And with that, I want to again extend my thanks to all of you for your presentations, for your coming here, traveling in some cases a quite long distance, and thank you very much.